to come forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors. Are these microphones working well enough? All right, excellent. Just to start off with some general comments, I want to congratulate the staff, and the whole board wants to congratulate the staff on how they've conducted this process, in particular the pre-consultation, which I think has helped us iron out where communities see themselves. And the council did well to take that pre-consultation seriously and come up with a very reasonable compromise initial proposal. And in local government, people tend to make submissions on things that make them angry, and the lack of submissions would at least indicate a lack of anger and certainly a lack of outrage. It seems to me, from having listened to a lot of the submissions and read all of the submissions, that people are most concerned to keep their suburbs united, and the board certainly shares these concerns. We are very, very pleased that Sydenham, Waltham, Addington and Sydenham, Waltham, Addington, those suburbs which have been split for a long time and which were split by Brougham Street, have been kept together. So now I just want to talk specifically about some boundary changes, and which have all been signalled by our community and are in the submission, but these are a bit more legible than the written submission. So over here we have that South Hoon Hay, and the big picture with the big oblong around it is South Hoon Hay, which is like Kaiwara and Rydale Street, and bordered by Hoon Hay Road. Currently that is in Hallswell, and it should be in Hoon Hay. And very much those people see themselves as part of Hoon Hay. We had submissions from people who live there, a very strong feeling from people in Hoon Hay that they want that to be incorporated into the Spreydon ward. And the same goes for the upper small, the one on my upper right. That has been called Hill Morton. It's the Warren Crescent area. In terms of making the numbers work, and we've done the calculations on this, you can do this if you remove Summerfield or Western Summerfield. You can put in South Hoon Hay and North Hoon Hay or Hill Morton if you remove that, the next bit which I'll talk about next. But you have to keep that Cardinal Drive area, which is actually connected to Aidenfield by roads. It's much worse. So with the X, the big red X, that's Cardinal Drive mesh block. You can remove that. Thanks, Daryl. And the final one on this page, my lower right, that is Western Summerfield, and the north of it is Frankley Street. At the moment, Summerfield is divided between Cashmere and Spreydon, and people in Summerfield want to be together in the same ward, and their preference would be Cashmere. And in terms of making all the numbers work with getting all Hoon Hay together in Spreydon, that's the most sensible thing to do, and it's uncontroversial. Everybody's happy with that particular solution. Now, on the next page, this is the Woolston boundary. Now, Woolston's not currently in our ward, and the areas concerned in the north of it aren't in our ward, and so we haven't done as much work on this. But just in terms of a basic solution, and I understand that people in Phillipstown want to be in the Woolston ward because of the school now, but the one in terms of what was in our submission, all of Woolston proper needs to be in the Woolston ward. The old Woolston area down on the bottom right, and eastern Woolston north of Ferry Road there needs to be connected with the rest of Woolston. It doesn't make any sense that the area at Woolston Village should be separated from the rest of Woolston, and the boundary should be Linwood Ave or the canal rather than Ferry Road. And this is and in terms of specific boundaries, this is the last bit. This is Craycroft, bordered by Cashmere Road at the north, and it's just a small section of streets, but it's a very discreet community. They're very cohesive, high level of social capital. People know each other. They just had a massive garage sale. You had about, 40 different households putting stuff out, and it was very successful. This is a small area that's currently proposed to be in the Hallswell ward. It should be in the Cashmere ward, and that's where they want to be. But the main thing is to have it all together, and it's currently not. So that's a basic solution to that boundary issue. And that's the specific proposals that I have. The board has also noted that we wish to see the number of urban boards remain at 6, and 16 wards does make this a bit more difficult and unwieldy. But it's entirely feasible under the Local Electoral Act to have different sized community boards. And for instance, you could have some taking up 2 of the proposed wards and some taking up 3. That's entirely feasible. But the only hesitance around that is that if you're only going to have 2 members per ward-sized board division, 2 community board members, that's not really viable for a board. So they would have to have 3 each. And I'd be happy for boards to be bigger. I think that will be good, but it's entirely feasible. Just a small note on the peninsula, it does sound like the council is pretty keen to keep it as it is if possible, and our board submission is silent on this, but I do want to note, having played with the numbers myself, I think it would be very, very difficult to get the boundaries done in a way that keeps the metro suburbs together, as the community has spoken so strongly about, while also keeping the peninsula as it is. I think that probably the best way, the most simple way of making that work is to add a 17th ward, which would give you more to play with. I think it would be very difficult otherwise. And I'm sure that you know this, but the status quo in terms of the current board arrangements isn't going to meet the statutory requirements around not putting communities together that are unlike. So that's not really a solution either. So I'm happy to take questions now.
Questions? Jimmy.
Thank you. Regarding to the one question, you particularly mentioned the Hong Head South should be in the Hong Head area, but whether that's including the south of Henderson Street, because when the Hallswell Resident Association make a submission, I asked Hallswell Resident Association what's their point of view, but they mentioned because the Henderson Street South, traditionally they are easy access to the kind of the community facility, like the library, service center, etc., and also access to the school, very convenient. So I'm not sure. What's your point of view?
There is a corner of
Yes.
bordered by Henderson's Road,
Yes.
that's currently in Rickett and Wigram.
Yes.
And funny, the improvements of the guttering there go all the way to the Rickett and Wigram border and stop at the Spreydon Heathcote border. That area there, those people would like to be in the in the Spreydon ward. However, to make the numbers work and to keep the optimum amount of people included, all of Hoon Hay included,
Yes.
that area there is slightly too big to be included with the rest of the changes that we made. So in terms of balancing the competing interests,
Yes.
that's probably the best solution. So this South Hoon Hay
Yes.
has been in Spreydon Heathcote since 2004, whereas that's been in Rickett and Wigram and was in the Paparoa County Council before then. So
Okay.
it seems to make sense.
Thank you.
Yep. Jamie.
Thanks. Thank you, Paul. Sorry to play devil's advocate here, and I'm not trying to be provocative, but just out of curiosity, what's your view when the press ran their own survey and you got a clear majority saying that of the respondents on the website...
You mean the scientific online survey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
There's no need for sarcasm. I mean, it's just, it is just simply people, responding to a request.
So
comment.
you've raised valid points, and that's
Well,
fair. And
what
more,
other
can I
decisions
just
would you
let me
like to
finish,
make
mate?
on
Hold
the
on,
basis of
Ferdinand.
unscientific?
No. He's asking a
I'm-
question. Can you just listen to the question?
So just interested, what is the view, and for whatever reason, when a majority have said that they wanted no change, and then a second poll that said 87% said that they didn't want more councillors, out of what's the view on that?
Yeah, sorry, I should have not interrupted you, Councillor Goff, but I do find that I don't think that's a good basis for making decisions. What I do think is a good basis for making decisions is the written and oral submissions, and that's quite a different tone and with more levels of precision. And we have the submissions are pretty clear that the number of councillors is largely uncontroversial. Some people want fewer, in terms of 14, some people would like more, like I would like 19, there's no secret, but I don't think a stuff poll is any basis really even for a discussion.
Cool. Thank you. Phil?
Thanks, Paul. Can I just to clarify just that the board's views around the Hoon Hay area, it was in response to Councillor Chen's question, so basically around there you would retain, the board would want to retain that current boundary of Henderson's Road?
Yes, yes, that boundary of Henderson's Road is fine. That's not an issue.
Right.
Just wanting to make sure that all the households on Henderson's Road, so the mesh block should be probably the other side, but there was no submission from the people on Henderson's Road. As I understand it, households on the western side are in Rickett and Wigram, and it's a fine boundary because it's a very small number of boundaries, so I don't think that should change.
Thank you. And I also just want to ask you about your reasons for suggesting the possibility of, say, 17 wards, and as you allude to, there's been other deputations around the possibility of 19. But I just want to ask you, I'm assuming, or have assumed, that the rationale for needing more wards is because of the difficulty of actually moving those populations if the council recommend retaining Banks Peninsula as a single ward. Is it around the challenge of moving the populations?
Fundamentally, I think that Christchurch is underrepresented, but second to that is the fact that if we want to Banks Peninsula to remain as it is, and we want to keep the communities happy that have made lots of submissions very clear that they don't want their community separated, it's going to be very difficult with 16 wards, as far as I can tell. Now, I'm not a mapping expert, but I don't envy the job of people trying to come up with an alternative solution. It's a very difficult job.
So, and this is my last question, so would the possibility of having an additional community board, would that mitigate that difficulty, do you believe, or what's your view on that? If the council were to decide on an additional community board in the metropolitan area?
No, I don't think that. I think that's a separate issue. But it's very clear from our community and from reading the submissions that people don't want to see a reduction of the number of community boards. And what came out in pre-consultation is that people really like their community boards. And it's really good as a community board chair to hear that affirmation of the role that community boards play in the community.
Thank you.
May I just ask a question just to
Yep. Ben?
Oh, thank you, Ben. Perhaps if we could have some updated maps at some point, would that be possible?
Updated for what?
Maps of the...
We haven't updated the maps.
Oh, okay.
So these are the proposals?
These are the proposed. These are them.
Okay.
And they're out. You've got the
Yeah.
document that went out.
Okay,
Yep.
that's fine.
So-
I thought we may have some variations at the end.
No, we may well do, but we've got to direct staff to do that. Tim and Yanni.
Paul, just follow on from what Councillor Goff was talking about. The pre-consultation was involved around somewhere up to 3,000 people, and yet we only had technically a few submissions compared to that number. I mean, do you think from the feedback that you've got from the communities that we've talked to, etc., that the reason for that is that the pre-consultation process was extremely good, or your thoughts on that?
I think that is part of the reason. I also think that the council put a very reasonable initial proposal out. And I want to add again, that the concern for people is their communities not being separated into separate wards. That is a number one concern.
Thank you.
I think that's a fair assessment. Yeah. Yanni?
Thank you. Just on page 185, you've got some maps and you've got different colours. Can you just explain what those colours mean?
Well, it's that's just the different mesh blocks.
Right. And what does each colour represent?
So dark green is decile 1, the least deprived, and red, dark red, there's no dark red there, it's the most deprived, so yellow's in the middle.
Okay. And then just, my understanding is that, you went up and talked with the local government commission, or you had some presentation around the process, and I just wondered, I know time's up, but if you could just go through the kind of tests that council is supposed to do as part of the review, rather than just, the cost and the number of councillors. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that my understanding is that council has to consider in terms of fair and effective democracy. And
We've got that information. That's the legal requirement that we're going through. So, I mean, the overworked councillors isn't one of the considerations that we take into account either.
Well, except as it regards to effective representation, but cost is not a consideration and should not be.
I know that, but we know what the rules are in terms of what our consideration is, and we will have the entire checklist in front of us when we make the decision.
Yeah, but the submitter was asked to respond to a staff survey, and
Yanni, could you just stop there, please? Thank you. Thank you very much for presenting, Paul. That was great.